When I first came up with this idea, and I was talking about it to some of my friends, what really drove it is what's the definition of life, and it was just a mania at the time. It was the only thing I was talking about, and some people were saying you're just really obsessed with this definition of life, and and to me it's the you know this you know this is one of the most important questions of our time, and it's weird what this came out of is I started to read a lot about viruses and a lot of what alien life is supposed to be like and what artificial life is supposed to be like, and and the more I read about it, the more I thought about it, I'm like, we need to have a better definition of life. If you look at a lot of the things, and it's weird, viruses seem to be like kind of on the border of this. You read some things, they'll say viruses are alive. You read other things, they'll say viruses aren't alive. And you look at a lot of their reasons, it's kind of, it, they're kind of arbitrary reasons, they're kind of nebulous reasons. You see, well, they don't necessarily reproduce in of themselves, they need other things to live off of, and but that's kind of like parasites, and so we consider parasites alive. And also, if you could almost think of viruses as sort of you know just an extension of things that are alive already. And so, it's really weird. And one of the things that really started this is, the whole controversy about the microbes that they found on Mars, and 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 if you look at some of the old news reports about it, it's really weird. It's just kind of like, they say, well, it's alive, and then they're like, wait, no, it's not alive, and then they're like, well, maybe it's alive, and they they said eventually they said the consensus is that there is no consensus, and I was thinking, I was talking to one of my friends, if you look at you know, most of these in most movies, where they discover alien life, it's a little green man or a little gray man, and I'm like, that's not how it's going to happen. What's going to happen is when we finally actually do discover alien life, it's going to be something that's so bizarre and so exotic that we're not even going to be sure what we're looking at first, and people are probably going to be studying it for years, and there's probably going to be people right off the bat that are going to say that it's alien life, but it's going to be a controversial thing that people are going to be debating for years and years, even decades, even centuries maybe, and then eventually they'll reach a consensus, and I keep saying what we need to do is we need to have a better definition. We need to have, and these things are coming up. We're going to be testing geysers on the moons of Jupiter. We have computers that can beat human beings in chess matches. We need to have a better definition of life. And the more I read about it, and the more I think about it, I think extreme complexity is the only thing that is exclusive and universal to all living things. Now, that's not to say, you say, what level of complexity? And I'm really not sure about that. I think what we should do is have sort of a scale. Uh, and even though that seems kind of weird, this kind of comes out of, they were talking about, if we find alien life, is it going to be plant life or is it going to be animal life? And the thing is, plant and animal life, that's really just a fluke of how our evolution worked on Earth, life just branched out into these two major groups. One's called plants, one's called animals. But, if we go to an alien planet, there could be just one branch or 10 branches, and they could all have, attributes that we could consider either plant or animal. So the thing is, we're kind of tricked into thinking that there's these sort of absolute boundaries between different kinds of life and living things and non-living things. So I think the best thing to do is to have a scale. We could have humans at one end that are considered 100% alive, rocks at the other end which are considered 0% alive, and then maybe viruses in the center which are considered 50% alive. But to me, that seems like the best definition so far. We need to get away from sort of arbitrary things. Well, does it reproduce? How does it reproduce? People, fire reproduces. Fire spreads just like life spreads, and it even eats things. And if you consider, you know, that living things can be like a wave. If you took like a sound wave and then put an obstruction in it, and the sound wave split off into two different waves that had relatively the same wave pattern, the original parent wave is gone, but the two offspring waves still exist. So in a lot of ways, you're just talking about reproduction. It's really acting like a cell. It's just a lot simpler. So extreme complexity, as far as I can tell, is the best definition for what a living thing is. And I think uh, that's uh, that's the easiest thing for us to comprehend. It's a simple, objective thing that we can look at and measure and have a really good idea on whether or not something should be considered alive. Okay, and another criticism I get, ironically, comes from Christians and theists and people like that. They say, um, well, how can you say that life is just super complexity? What about the soul? What about vitalism or mana or whatever? And I'll say to that, hey, maybe those things are real, maybe they're not. I don't know. But I think if we, I'm not saying I necessarily don't believe uh, that supernatural things are necessarily impossible. But I think when we're given the opportunity to use something objective to define something, I think we should use that definition if we can, versus resorting to the supernatural. If you can use science, if you can use some sort of objective thing that can be comprehended with the human mind, I think even someone who believes in the supernatural would concede that we should use that instead. And to add on to the irony, uh, most atheists I talk to completely agree with all the individual statements of my argument until it gets to the point where it's obvious what I'm doing with them. And so it's like they like all the legs of the table, they just don't like the table.